Pull up a chair, friend. I want to tell you about a young man who stared at a watch he didn't understand and asked a question that broke a 600-year-old industry wide open. I was reading a book this winter by a fella named Guy Kawasaki, The Art of the Start. He was the chief evangelist at Apple back in the day. Knows a thing or two about how new things claw their way into the world. And there's a question he keeps coming back to. 2 words. Therefore, what? You'll see what they mean by the end of this story. Now picture a village in the Swiss Alps. 1968. Snow on the rooftops, smoke from the chimneys, and a watch shop on the corner of the square that's been there since Napoleon was a boy. Inside that shop is Elias Vogel, 28 years old, 6 years an apprentice. Hands so steady he can set a hairspring with his eyes closed. His master, Herr Brunner, 65, mustache like a rake, makes the kind of watch that bankers in Zurich buy with 1 finger and a smile. 300 parts, hand-finished, engraved with the family name in copper plate. A Brunner watch is a small mechanical universe ticking on your wrist. You all listening? That is the work Elias does, every day, on a stool by the window, while the church bell across the square keeps time the same way it has since 1422. Then one morning, a Japanese tourist walks in. He's lost a button on his watch and wants it fixed. Elias takes the watch, and friend, he has never seen anything like it. No mainspring, no balance wheel, no jewels, just a tiny sliver of crystal and a battery the size of an aspirin. He holds it to his ear. There's no tick. There's a hum. He looks at the dial. The second hand is sweeping clean. He sets it next to a Brunner watch on the bench. 24 hours later, he checks. The Brunner has lost 20 seconds. The Japanese watch has lost none. Not 1 second. Elias goes white. He brings it to Herr Brunner. He says, "Master, look at this." And Herr Brunner picks it up between 2 fingers like it's a beetle that crawled into his soup, and he says, "Elias, we are watchmakers, not battery jugglers." And he drops it on the bench. End of conversation. But Elias couldn't drop it. That night, he lay in his attic room above the shop, the Japanese watch in one hand and a Brunner pocket piece in the other. And a question started ticking in his head. Therefore, what? If a sliver of crystal can keep better time than 300 jeweled parts, therefore, what? Kawasaki writes that great companies don't start with megalomaniac dreams. They start with simple questions. Therefore, what? Is there a better way? Where is the market leader weak? And Elias started asking that third one. Where is the market leader weak? Kawasaki names 3 places to look. First, when the market leader is committed to a way of doing business. Second, when the market leader's customers are dissatisfied. Third, when the market leader is milking a cash cow and has stopped innovating. Elias started counting on his fingers. 1. Herr Brunner had been making the same watch the same way for 43 years. Committed doesn't begin to cover it. 2. Just last winter, a banker had stormed into the shop, red as a beet, complaining his Brunner watch lost a half minute a day, and he'd missed a train to Geneva. Brunner had charged him for the adjustment. 3. The shop had not changed a single mechanism in Elias's lifetime. They were polishing the same wheels their grandfathers polished. 3 for 3. The market leader was weak. Now, here's where Elias read something that lit his hair on fire. Kawasaki tells the story of ice. In the 1800s, men with horses and saws cut ice from frozen New England ponds. Call that ice 1.0. 30 years later, factories froze water in the city and trucks delivered it. Ice 2.0. 30 years after that, refrigerators. Ice 3.0. And here's the kicker. None of the ice harvesters became factory men. None of the factory men became refrigerator men. Why? Because they thought their job was cutting blocks of ice, not keeping things cold.
Elias sat up in his bed. He whispered it out loud. Herr Brunner thinks his job is making gears, but the job was always telling time. He had jumped a curve in his head. Now he had to jump it with his hands. So Elias started building in the attic by candlelight. He bought a little quartz crystal from a radio shop in Zurich. He scavenged a battery. He filed his own contacts. And for 3 months, he made a watch that did not work. It ran fast. It ran slow. It ran backward one memorable Tuesday. 3 months, 3 failures. And then Herr Brunner came up the attic stairs looking for a missing file, saw the parts on the table, and his face turned to stone. He fired Elias on the spot. "Get out of my shop! Get out of my village! You have insulted 6 generations of Vogel and Brunner men." And just like that, Elias was on the road with a satchel and a half-built watch, and no master and no name. This is the Valley. Kawasaki has a phrase for what most folks do at the Valley. They go back to polishing wheels. They go back because the alternative is terrifying. The author writes it plain. There's only what works and what doesn't work in entrepreneurship. And Elias did not yet know which side he was on. He sat on a bench at the train station. He looked at the half-built thing in his satchel. And a tinker, a wandering tinker who fixed pots, sat down next to him and saw what he was holding. The tinker said, "Boy, does it tell time?" Elias said, "It loses 10 seconds a week." The tinker said, "Then ship it. Perfect is for old men with shop windows. You have a thing that works. Sell it to the first 100 people who don't care that the case is wood." Kawasaki has a name for what that tinker just said. He calls it, "Don't worry, be crappy." You don't ship the polished version first. You ship the version that is just barely viable, just barely valuable, just barely good enough to teach you something. He even gave it a real ugly acronym, MVVVP. Minimum Viable Valuable Validating Product. It's a mouthful, I know. But the idea is, get the thing into someone's hands.
Elias took his half-built watch to the spring market in Bern. He laid it on a wooden plank with a hand-lettered sign. The case was carved birch. The dial was hand-painted. It was not pretty. But the second hand swept clean. Now, before he left for that market, he did one more thing the book taught him. He sat on the stool in his rented room and he asked himself, why? Not how much money, not how famous. Why? Kawasaki calls it making meaning. Meaning is not money or prestige. Meaning is making the world a little better. And then, on top of meaning, you write a mantra. 3 or 4 words, not a paragraph mission statement nobody remembers, a sacred verbal formula. Starbucks, the author writes, has a mantra. Rewarding everyday moments. 3 words, short, sweet, carved in your bones. Elias wrote his on the back of his sign. 3 words. Honest time everywhere. Honest time everywhere. That's what the watch was for. So a farmer's wife could catch the train. So a banker wouldn't be late to a meeting. So a midwife would know when the contractions were 2 minutes apart. Honest time everywhere. And when people walked up to that wooden plank in the Bern market and asked him what the thing in front of them was, he didn't say, a quartz oscillator coupled to a digital frequency divider. He said 3 words. And 71 people bought a watch that day. 71. 3 years later, Elias had a workshop with 12 apprentices. 5 years later, the Brunner shop closed its doors. And one cold morning in 1976, an old man in a black coat with a mustache like a rake walked into Elias's workshop and stood in the doorway. Elias looked up from his bench. Herr Brunner did not say a word. He just looked at the racks of crystal-cut watches, at the apprentices, heads down, at the brass plate on the wall. Honest time everywhere. And then he nodded once, took off his hat, and walked back out into the snow. Now I want to ask you something, friend. Real honest. Is there a thing in your life, a job, a habit, a way of doing that you keep doing because that is how it's been done? Are you cutting ice while the world is building refrigerators? 3 little words might crack the whole question open for you. Therefore, what? Kawasaki's book, The Art of the Start, is full of questions like that. Questions that don't let you off easy. If you've got a thing inside you that's been ticking too long without an answer, pick that book up. Read it slow. It won't tell you what to build. It'll just keep asking, therefore what, until you do. And listen, if this story warmed you up at all, hit that little subscribe button down below. I've got more stories on the shelf, more books on the table, and a fresh pot of coffee every Sunday. Come sit a while. Read the book. Ask the question. Honest time everywhere. Good night, friend.